Yeah, g'day everyone. Max here from the world we live in. I want to talk about a really controversial topic that's a very polarising issue in Australia at the moment. There is a former SAS soldier. He's one of our highest decorated soldiers ever. I think he's our highest decorated living soldier. And he's been arrested just in the last few days, and he's being remanded on 5 counts of war crime murder. That is the charge that he's facing, times five. So his name is Ben Roberts Smith, and it is absolutely driving a wedge through our nation. So I want to talk about it. I want to talk about it purely from an objective moral standpoint. As a Christian who believes all human beings are valuable because they're created in the image of God, and who believes that we must honour things like the Geneva Convention, etc. That's the position I'm coming from, and I don't know if he's guilty. I'm simply saying that if he is, then if he did what he's being accused of, then he's a murderer and he shouldn't be worshipped. He should be put in jail. That's my perspective. But there is so much rhetoric flying around about this case. There is so much there's so much smoke and mirrors and sleight of hand and trying to make a lot of noise and pointing and a lot of whataboutism sort of going on around this. But I'll try and give you the sort of basic gist of it. So this guy, he's retired now. He's about 47, I think. He was in Afghanistan in 2006, 2007, I think 2009, 10, and 12. So he did 6 tours over those 5 years in Afghanistan. And while he was there, he did some extremely courageous acts, of bravery, and he stormed machine gun pits and single-handedly killed tons of enemy fighters. And he was awarded a lot of medals for that, including the Victoria Cross, which is I think it's our highest medal for bravery. And he was a celebrity in Australia, big-time celebrity for years, and he was getting all sorts of honorary, titles and jobs and all kinds of stuff just thrown at him, And because in this country, we worship our military. We have a culture where we literally worship our military. We put them on the highest pedestal, and they can do no wrong. If they sign up and join the army to go and fight in another country, we basically just decide that they are amazing and there's no wrong they can do, essentially. So this guy, while he was in Afghanistan, so his last deployment, I think, to Afghanistan was 2012. And after he came back around 2016, 2017, some allegations surfaced and a request was brought for him to be investigated for some war crimes. There was some investigative journalism done as well. And essentially what happened, some investigative journalists did a report on the allegations being made, and Australian soldiers were interviewed and spoke against him and said, yeah, this happened. And essentially what happened was Ben Robert Smith he filed a civil suit against these journalists for defamation. And essentially what happened then was the evidence, the case was essentially staged in the courtroom in a civil court, because if the person didn't do what they're being accused of, then defamation can be, it's a legitimate case. If they did do what they're being accused of, then there's no defamation. And essentially the evidence was presented, and the judge effectively ruled that on the balance of probability, Ben Robert Smith did commit these murders. Therefore, the defamation case was thrown out. So anyway, it's been nearly another 9 years since then. And now there's been ongoing investigations by the federal police, and they've obviously confident that they've accumulated enough evidence now to charge him with these 5 counts of war crime murder. Now, look, so many labels are getting thrown around here because this is such a hot issue. So you know, hopefully people that know my channel, well, not necessarily, but let me just clarify. So I've got no problem with the military. If you join the military and our country is directly threatened and you fight and kill to defend our country, I will thank you for your service. I will shake your hand. If my country was directly being threatened, I would sign up to go fight. Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, if I was able to, you know. But here's the thing. Most of the battles that we have fought over the last, since the end of World War II have been for Israel. We're invading other people's countries. It doesn't matter what their cultures are like. It doesn't matter how they treat their people. That's their business, right? And a lot of the time, yes, while there is some evil that gets done in these countries and in these cultures, the fact is a lot of it is exaggerated or it's taken out of context. And the truth is anyway, regardless of that, that's not why we were there, right? 9/11 happened, which was a straight up false flag attack for Israel, all right? American citizens were murdered in a controlled demolition to come up with a reason, with an excuse for America to rampage through the Middle East on Israel's behalf, to clear all the opposition out of the way so Israel could create their greater state of Israel, which has always been their goal. This is not a secret. This is on the public record. There was a list of countries well before 9/11 that were put forward. There were 7 countries that, because of Bibi Netanyahu, right, and his influence, it was handed down from the top brass in the American military that these 7 countries had to be taken out in 5 years. Okay, and it was let me see here. Let me count my fingers. So it was Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Iran, North Korea, and Sudan. Okay, now it didn't go to plan, obviously, but they did. They took out Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Sudan, but they couldn't take down North Korea because they've got nukes, and now Iran was the last one to take down, and it's all part of this plan. So we're in another country, someone else's country, as invaders, okay? And you can dress it up any way you like. Oh, they're Muzo terrorists, whatever you want to say. Bottom line is, we were invading another person's country, and they were fighting to defend their country, right, from a foreign invasion. That's the bottom line. All right. Were they observing the Geneva Convention? I don't think so, but that's not how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to have honor, and we're supposed to act with, with clarity, moral clarity in the way we conduct war. So I just want to talk about this. So the allegations are, right, here's some of the allegations. So there was the first point is there was a culture called blooding that he was a part of. Okay, and that is essentially where you encourage or you order or you peer pressure new soldiers, new recruits on the team to execute prisoners to basically get their first kill out of the way. It's called blooding. Okay, it's an ancient initiation ritual that's been practiced in cultures all over the world. Blooding, it's like from the old days, bloodying your sword, your dagger. It was an initiation in the mafia. You had to take a life before you could, make your bones and get made and all that kind of thing. And it's been going on forever, right? And this culture, this was happening in the SAS, right? So that's part of the allegations, right? The other allegation was he kicked a disabled man. He kicked him off a cliff. Sorry, this wasn't the disabled man. This was just a man. These people were all prisoners, by the way. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the fog of war thing that's being raised. I'll address that in a minute. But what happened was these people were all prisoners, okay? So bear that in mind. Okay, so under the Geneva Convention, I can't remember the Latin term, but it basically means they were out of the fight. They were secured. They were not presently posing a threat, okay? So, and they were civilians anyway. Like, these people, to my knowledge, were not combatants anyway. There maybe one or two were, but the majority of them were civilians who'd just been detained, Okay, so bear that in mind as well. They had no evidence these people were enemy fighters. Okay, so one guy, Ben Robert Smith himself, apparently kicked off the cliff like this is Sparta kind of style, and then when he was still alive at the bottom, ordered for him to be shot. Another guy who was mentally disabled was executed. He was hiding in tall grass and he had a mental disability. And there's footage of that. And they come up upon this guy and one of the soldiers says, you want me to do the cunt? And he gets the nod and he shoots him, executes him. Other allegations that Ben Robert Smith, executed prisoners. There was one guy who had a prosthetic leg. He executed this guy and he had all the other people in the team drink from this guy's prosthetic leg. Okay, so this isn't killing done, in a life or death struggle by people who respect life. Like, this is people murdering people and then celebrating it and thinking it's cool and like disrespecting the dead in the ways that I've just described. These are bad people with bad attitudes and a mean spirit. Okay, so these aren't heroes; these are thugs. Rightio. So these are the allegations. And like I said, the evidence was examined. Admittedly, it was in a different court with a different standard of evidence, but a judge deemed that on the balance of probability, he actually did these things. Right? Now, there were 21 Australian soldiers who testified. I don't know if all of them testified against him. Right? Just trying to be transparent and honest. I don't know. But a large number of them did. They came forward and they said, yes, he did these things and this culture existed and we're ashamed of it as soldiers who have honour and we're speaking out against it. These are the people that I believe should be celebrated as heroes. But in this country, unfortunately, there is this, just like I said, there's this blind worship of our military, whether they do right or wrong. And people, and this is a constant rhetoric I'm hearing at the moment. It's like, oh, these... and don't get me wrong, I don't like Albo either. I don't like any of our politicians. I think they're all scum. Apart, the only ones I like are the ones that'll never get in because they're too honest. Guys like Alex Antic and Gerard Rennick, they're my two favourites. Even guys like Ralph Babbitt and George Christensen, mate, have gone to bat for this guy. So I don't trust them. They should be they claim to be Christians, but they don't value human life. It's like some human life's valuable, other human life isn't. If you're not a white Australian Christian, then you don't rate. Murder's murder. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. Right now, killing somebody who is secured and detained and has been disarmed and is a prisoner, that's murder. We wouldn't want to be treated that way. So why would we treat our enemies that way? Now, so these are the kind of arguments like, oh, these soft politicians who have never been scared or under threat in their life, they send these people to do these horrible jobs to fight these horrible people, and then they crucify them when they get back. And it's like, okay. Now, there's a lot of noise being made and these kinds of things are being said, but let's just be objective. Let's just take it point at a time. Okay, mate, these guys were not conscripted. Okay, these guys joined the military because, right, there's a lot of lurks and perks, right, working for the government, for starters. These guys want the action, they want the adventure, they want to play with guns, and some of them are just sociopaths, and it's how they can get away with legally killing people, right? Let's just be honest. Let's call it what it is. Okay, now, we had no business being in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was no threat to Australia, and it was no threat to America. Okay, but we invaded that country, and then I hear this guy I just heard on YouTube saying, and now we've got these crazy extremist Muslims here in our country. These were the kinds of people that Ben was fighting over there. And it's like, okay, wait, back up, mate. The reason those people are here is because of all the foreign wars that we've conducted for Israel. The reason that Muslims are all immigrating to the West is because we're destroying their countries. We're bombing their countries. We're killing their leaders. We're starting civil wars. And they're not safe there and they're moving over here. And yes, they resent us. Can you blame them with what we've been doing to them for the last 50 odd years? Like, we're such hypocrites, mate. Like, we're the ones doing the invading and the killing and the bombing. And these guys don't, and we don't think they have a right to be upset about it or to fight back. I'm so tired of this hypocrisy, mate. These double standards. So anyway, So they're the kind of things that are being said. Now, other things that are being said is, okay, fog of war. You know, these guys are making life or death decisions. They have to make them fast, and you know, we can't judge them for this. And it's like, okay, well, let's look at a scenario. Okay, let's say this was a situation where there was a firefight. Okay. Ben and his team were suddenly fired upon, and there's bullets flying around, and there's dust and smoke flying around, visibility's poor. You fire back in self-defense, and after the battle, you examine the battlefield and you realize you've accidentally shot some civilians who were also in that direction. Okay, or maybe you've called in an airstrike, and some civilians that were in close proximity to those attackers have been killed too. Okay? If that's what this was, you wouldn't be hearing a peep out of me. I'd just be like, look, it's a terrible tragedy, but these guys were in an impossible situation and they did what they had to do, and unfortunately civilians were killed. It's tragic, it's horrible. Hopefully, if you know their consciences, they will be haunted by that for the rest of their lives, if they've got a conscience. But you know, they don't deserve to be prosecuted for that. You know, it's unreasonable, all right? But that's not what happened. Let's look at another scenario. Okay, because another thing that's being thrown around on social media is, oh, these Taliban, they strap dynamite to, you know, teenagers and blow them up just to try and kill our soldiers. Okay, well, let's look at a scenario like that. Let's say you're over there. Say you're Ben Robert Smith. You're in Afghanistan. You've heard about your buddies getting killed by human beings rigged with explosives, or you've even seen it yourself, right? So you're edgy. You know, your nerves are shot to shit. Right, and then a teenage boy walks towards your position, right? Okay, you see him coming. You're worried about that very thing. You shout, stop, or we'll shoot. You know, maybe you've got an Arabic speaker on your team. Maybe you've learnt enough Arabic to give those kind of basic directions, and you say, stop or we'll shoot. You put your hands up in the universal stop, don't move gesture, right? The boy keeps coming. You study his face through your scope. You can see he's sweating. Looks like he's praying. You know, is he preparing for death? You know, you look at his jacket or his jumper or his shirt, and it looks like there's something bulky underneath it. You make a decision with a heavy heart because you value life, and you're not a child killer, but you feel like you've got no choice to protect your people and get out of there alive, and you shoot him and you take him down, right? And then you go over and you examine his body and subsequently discover that he was not carrying any explosives. Again, if that is what had happened, you would not be hearing a peep out of me, because I would totally understand in the circumstances that decision and that action. Still a horrible tragedy, a horrible result of us being somewhere we shouldn't even be in the first place. I'd be pissed about that, but I wouldn't be blaming these men for that, and I wouldn't be calling for any kind of legal action to be taken against them. Just a horrible byproduct of being in a war situation against an enemy that will do horrible things like that to even up the odds. Okay, but that's not what happened, right? None of those things happened. Okay, the other scenario being thrown around is very true. Afghan soldiers, there were quite a few cases of Afghans who were supposed to be working with the Australians and the Americans, turning on them when their guard was down and murdering some of them and then escaping. And there was one guy in particular, and I can't remember his name, but he did that to an Australian team, and he's still alive today, and he's still celebrated by the Afghans as a hero of that war. And a lot of people are angry just about that. But again, remember what's going on here. We're the invaders. These people are fighting back against the invasion. So of course they celebrate their people. Like they defended their country. Like we were there to destroy their country and take over their government. And it took them nearly 30 years. But they, 22 years or whatever, 23 years or whatever it was by the time it all went, we pulled out. But they won. They were patient. They outlasted us, and they won. It's that old saying, like Afghanistan is where nations go to, empires go to die. They always whoop everyone that comes against them. They're formidable fighters. Whether they're right or wrong, that's not the issue. Like the right or wrong of Islamic culture or Afghani culture is not the point of this video. All right, it's about, did this guy murder unarmed human beings or did he not? That's all we're talking about here. Okay, so again, okay, you're worried about people turning on your team. Once again, these were not people who were already on the team, who were suspected of being traitors, who were then interrogated and suddenly found to be a threat and then killed in a life or death struggle. What this was were people who were prisoners, who were no longer in the fight, right? Should have been treated to all the rights and dignity to be afforded a prisoner of war under the Geneva Convention, but they were executed. That's it. That's this thing, black and white. That's what we're talking about here. Now, what it comes down to is human life precious and valuable, or is it not? Right? Are these people not valuable because they speak a foreign language and they look different to us and they have a different religion, right? You know, and because there's some in their culture who treat people harshly. You know, is that enough reason to just execute them willy-nilly? And I would say emphatically no. It doesn't justify it at all. And that's what we're talking about here. And Australians can try and dress this up any way they like. They can talk about they can bring up weak politicians, and they can bring up lefties, and they can bring up, you know, how brutal some, you know, they can talk about ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, it's all just smoke and mirrors. It's all just noise trying to justify the fact that this guy's a sociopath, right? And he murdered innocent people, and he boasted about it, and he celebrated it. Right, and that's not the full story with this guy. You know, he was domestically violent to a woman that he was cheating, you know, having an affair with. He was bullying and harassing and intimidating other people in the defence force. You know, he's a thug. That's what it appears to be on paper, anyway. And you know, you can dress this up any way you like. They're the facts. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not a fan of government. I'm not a fan of the police. All right. But I do believe there are still people in the government and in the police who are trying to do the right thing as individuals, and they are trying to make sure that people don't get away with murder and justice is served. And you know, if a clear allegation is brought to the police that this guy committed war crimes, they have to investigate it. They can't just sweep it under the rug, because that's corruption. Right? Because murder is still murder, whether you like it or not. Like, these are crimes, and they have to be investigated. And if they've found evidence that he did this, then they have to pursue it. Now, plenty of other people went over there and weren't charged with war crimes. Like, I really don't believe this claim that there's this big conspiracy to smear this guy and destroy him because he's an alpha male and he's strong and he's like, what's the point of that? That doesn't achieve anything. You know what I mean? There's plenty of other alpha males who went over there and have fought in these wars. And again, whilst I absolutely believe all of these wars are all crap and based on false pretenses, and we've had no business being there, and we were the bad guys in the sense that we were there, we shouldn't have been there. You know, a lot of these guys went over with good intentions. They fought with distinction. They were brave. They were courageous. They backed their teammates. But they also acted with honour and integrity, and they treated their captives well, and they treated the locals well. And they're not facing war crimes charges. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, you know, let's just be real. The reason this guy's facing these charges is because there's evidence that he did something wrong. You know, and another thing that I've heard thrown around is, they had to, you know, they've arrested him 2 weeks before Anzac Day. This is an attack on Anzac Day. It's like, give me a break. Listen, I reckon it's just pure coincidence. Honestly, I think they've been investigating him, and this is the point they've reached where they've accumulated enough evidence where they're like, yeah, there's good evidence that we've got a murderer walking free. We have to go get him. Like, what are they going to do? Reach this conclusion 2 weeks before Anzac Day and go, oh, guys, sorry, this guy's a VC winner and everyone loves him and it's nearly Anzac Day. Let's just celebrate Anzac Day first and then we'll arrest him. Do you know what I mean? Like, how long do you want them to wait? Do you want them to wait till the day after Anzac Day? Do you want them to wait a week, 3 weeks, 6 months? Like, what's the appropriate amount of time? You know, then they'll say, they'll wait till Christmas, right? They'll arrest him in November. They go, oh, they arrested him just before Christmas. He's a family man. You know what I mean? Like, you can't win with people that are just out looking for BS excuses to criticise. You know what I mean? You know, you don't let murderers walk free. If you've got enough evidence to prosecute, you make the arrest. You know what I mean? So I just don't think there's anything in that. I think it's just coincidence. You know, but again, because we worship our soldiers, like, you don't mess with them. You don't mess with Anzac Day. Like, you know, and it's just, you know, and people are, you know, it's it's something that really concerns me because I am pro-freedom. I'm pro-liberty. I was against all the COVID tyranny, right? But the same people in that camp who would have been shoulder to shoulder with me in Canberra marching, they're pro-Israel. They've got no problem with Zionism and the slaughter in Gaza or the illegal wars against Iran and Lebanon and stuff like that. And they support these people going over to foreign countries and murdering civilians because they're brown, they're Muslims, they're muzzos. These guys are inherently basically racist. That's the only conclusion I can come to ultimately. And it's this whole culture, and it's not just an Australian problem, it's all over the world. But I'm addressing, this is my country and that's what I'm addressing. But there's this culture of, I'm going to back my team, I'm going to back my mates, I'm going to back my clique, no matter what they do, even if they do something wrong. If they murder someone, I'm going to help them hide the body. And yeah, that's cool. And that's the kind of thing we celebrate. Like, we celebrate people who murder, and people who do bad things. You know what I mean? Like, as long as it's not like child sex offenses, pedophilia, like, it's okay to murder people in our culture. We think it's cool. We think it's really, badass. And like, we love this Ben Robert Smith guy because he's a killer. We love killers, even if, and the fact that he's murdered innocent people doesn't matter because he murdered some bad guys too, And it's just, I think it's despicable. And that's the sleight of hand that's going on though. Like, all these Aussies now are acting outraged. They just can't believe it. You don't disrespect military. You don't go there. Don't go there. You do not question what they did over there. It's like, yeah, you should. If they committed war crimes, that needs to be called out. Like, look at this is a totally different scale and category, but look at the My Lai massacre during Vietnam. There's a similar spirit behind that massacre. I mean, American soldiers had lost friends. They were in a scenario where you couldn't tell who was friendly and who was an enemy because they're all Vietnamese, obviously. And there was people, there was an army, but there was also, civilians, they were fighting guerrilla warfare and all that. But they went into a village with elderly people and children and nursing mothers, and they massacred them. There's no excuse for that. But according to these Aussies, don't question it because they're in a terrible situation. It's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I understand PTSD and I understand all that stuff, right? But our ancestors went to war and they didn't come back with this kind of PTSD. They came back and they lived productive lives. But I'm convinced that the guys that went to war before us, and I did some research on this, and whilst it wasn't consistent, there were a lot of moments in history during like the American Civil War or World War I, World War II, where soldiers on both sides acted with incredible honor. And even though Geneva Convention wasn't in place then, similar codes were actually upheld, treating prisoners with dignity, not executing them, prisoner exchanges, that famous incident where the Germans and the Allies played soccer, in between the fighting, and all those kinds of things, have happened. So it is possible. And a lot of these men, they came back from the war and they lived pro-social lives and they reassimilated back into society. But for some reason, things are going on since like Vietnam, where soldiers are coming back and they're damaged and they're, and they've got PTSD and they're haunted and they suicide and all sorts of stuff. Now, I guess I'm just thinking about this on the fly. The nature of warfare changed in that time. It went from most of the time having a clear enemy in front of you across a battlefield, kind of changed to, guerrilla warfare and a lot more deception type warfare, where you didn't know where the next attack was going. I guess that probably is a factor. But I think, you just look at the way we've treated our enemies. Like, you look at the photos from Guantanamo Bay with the chick, like, with the cigarette and just all the, the intentional, like, shaming of the prisoners and all that kind of stuff, like, and people taking photos with corpses. A lot of soldiers did that. They sat there and, like, made gang signs and shit and smiling next to a corpse and stuff like that, and all that kind of disrespect. And that takes a toll on people, But I'm getting a bit off track. I'll wrap this up. But that's my view. Look, if he did this, then he deserved to spend the rest of his life in jail. And instead of, again, we have some amazing people in our armed forces who have served the military in their country with distinction, and they should be honoured. Men and women who have acted with integrity, who have acted with moral compass, and I think we don't have to just blindly support all soldiers. We should hold all people accountable. I know it's tough over there, right? But they wanted to be there. It was party time. You know what I mean? For these guys, they were having a ball, running around killing people. And, they're fine. They're fine. And they, you don't get away with murder just because, like, if PTSD is enough to get away with murder, we should empty our prisons, because a lot of the guys there have PTSD as well. So, like, let's be consistent. But no, there's just no excuse for murdering an unarmed prisoner. There's just not. So that's my view. Let me know what you think. Thanks for listening.